Well, have you taken any risks lately? Well, actually, we're all risk takers. Whenever you try something new, something for the first time, you're taking a risk. Like when you learn to walk or ride a bike or swim or hit a ball or drive a car. You take a risk. Then there are the bigger risks, like getting married. And Ivana and I celebrate 60 years of taking that risk Friday of this week. But thank you. There's the risk of having children, or the risk of starting a business or a career, moving across the country, all kinds of things that are risky for us. And why are we willing to take risks? Well, maybe because we see others doing it, or possibly other people encourage us to do it. But trust and risk go together, faith and risk. Faith is not spelled F-A-I-T-H, it's spelled R-I-S-K. Someone has said if something is not a risk, then it really doesn't require faith. A house was on fire at night, and a young boy was forced to go out on the roof. His father is on the ground with his arms outstretched, and he says, "Jump and I'll catch you." He knows that it's the only escape that his son has from the fire. Well, the boy could only see flames and smoke and dark. And he called out, "Daddy, I can't see you." And father responds, "But I can see you, and that's all that matters." Well, our gospel today is a story of terror on the Sea of Galilee. And as you heard, after feeding the 5,000, Jesus tells his disciples to go across the lake to the other side. And he wants to go off and pray. He's obviously still grieving the loss of John the Baptist. And the disciples are far from shore, and they're in a big storm. Not unusual on the Sea of Galilee. Sudden storms were common there. But it's 3 a.m., and they are fighting big waves. And during all of this, Jesus appears walking on that rough water. Now, some skeptics discount this miracle by saying, well, Jesus knew where the sandbar was. Well, not very likely in this big lake. The Sea of Galilee was 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, had an average depth of over 140 feet, the lowest freshwater lake on earth. Well, when the disciples see Jesus, they're scared to death. They think it's a ghost, and not uncommon at that time. And Jesus calms them down. And then impulsive Peter says, "If it's really you, let me come to you on the water." While visiting with Steve LeQuire about this text, his comment was, I can just see a big smile on Jesus' face, thinking, "Peter, do you have any idea what you're getting yourself into here?" Well, I don't think Peter was testing Jesus. He was the only one in the boat to take the risk, to trust and risk. And as a result, he experiences this unusual demonstration of God's power. But his faith and his trust disappears when he starts to think about what he's doing, when he thinks about the wind and the waves. And still he cries out to Jesus for help. Well, we aren't likely to walk on water, but we do walk into and through tough situations in our life. We deal with a lot of storms. And yes, faith and risk go together. Before Max Lucado, one of my favorite authors was Keith Miller. He just died this last January. And the following example was in one of his earlier books. I'm not sure which book. I don't have the books anymore, but maybe A Taste of New Wine. But this is the example. A letter was found in a baking powder can, wired to a handle of an old pump that offered the only hope of drinking water on a very long and seldom used trail across Nevada's Amargosa Desert. And this is what was on the note. This here pump is all right as of June 1932. I put a new sucker washer in, and it ought to last 5 years. But the washer dries out, and the pump has got to be primed. Under the white rock, I buried a bottle of water out of the sun, cork end up. There's plenty of water in it to prime the pump, but not if you drink the water first. Pour about 1/4 of it in and let her soak to wet the washer. Then pour in the rest medium fast and pump like crazy. You'll get water. The well has never run dry. Have faith. When you get watered up, fill the bottle and put it back like you found it for the next feller. Signed, Desert Pete. And then a P.S. Don't go drinking the water first. Prime the pump with it, and you'll get all you can hold. So, a real example of faith and trust and risk. Well, we're here this morning in this church to worship Jesus Christ, as the disciples ended up doing on that boat on the Sea of Galilee. And the church, like a boat, like a ship, can be a refuge, a place of safety from life's storms. Jesus sometimes calms the storms, and sometimes he calms us in the midst of our storms, giving confidence to go out and trust and risk and to be the church. Now, God doesn't just call us to come to church. God calls us to be the church. A number of you have told me that you were led here to Grace Lutheran from other churches because of storms that you experienced there. A decision certainly of faith and risk for you. Well, again, in our gospel, Peter trusted and risked by getting out of the boat. But then he lost his faith and started to sink, but called out to Jesus, who immediately reached out and rescued him, saying, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" Well, was Peter doubting Jesus, or was he doubting himself? A few years ago, our small group, along with some others, did a study by John Ortberg. And the title was, "If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat." And he wrote in the opening, "Peter's walk stands as an invitation to everyone who, like him, wants to step out in faith and experience more of the power and presence of God. Water walking is a picture of doing, with God's help, what we could never do on our own." End of quote. A lesson here may be that faith is not only putting our confidence in God, but it's the confidence that God has given to us to live as his disciples today. I like this verse about risk, written by a well-known author, Anonymous. "There was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked or never tried. He never sang or prayed. And when, at last one day, he passed away, his insurance was denied. Since he had never lived, they claimed he never died." Well, Peter, in spite of his failures and his imperfections, is the one who shows the most trust in Jesus. He's the risk taker. He's willing to try what seems impossible. Many of us are reluctant to take risks. We're afraid of failure, or looking foolish, or doing something wrong, so we end up at times doing nothing. Well, the miracles that Jesus performed here on earth were not just walking on water, or feeding 5,000, or changing water into wine, or healing, but changing hearts of people then, changing hearts now, yours and mine. That's the real miracle. He changed impulsive, wishy-washy Peter to a solid rock who was a great leader in the early church. And he changes us as we focus our attention on Jesus, even when life's waves and storms come crashing around us, threatening us. He won't let us drown. A miracle will happen, a miracle of trust in God and trust in ourselves. Faith is a gift. It's God's grace and love given freely to us. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, asking God to remove the thorn in my flesh, probably some physical ailment that he had. And he got this response: my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Well, of course, I have to share Max Lucado. In his book, In the Grip of Grace, he shares this scene. You're on a small charter plane with others on board, and suddenly the engine bursts into flame, and the pilot rushes out of the cockpit, and he says, we're going to crash, we've got to bail out. And he hands out parachutes. But one person, the first person says, well, I'd like a pink one, please. And he says, isn't it enough that I give you a parachute? And pushes that person out. Others ask for assurance that they won't get sick. Or another one's afraid of heights. Take away my fear. Others want goggles or boots, or can we wait till we're closer to the ground? And the pilot responds to each one, I've given you a parachute, and that's enough. Max concludes, we also ask God to remove fear or change our plans, and usually he answers with a gentle shove that leaves us airborne and suspended by his grace. And I conclude, that's enough. Amen.
Thanks for watching. I hope this video can further the discussion of your relationship with Christ, either at home or maybe in the comments below.